Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to PT on Ice with the title You Can't Cheat Feel. My name is Ryan Smith. I am faculty of the Clinical Management of the Fitness Athletes. I'm COO of Recharge and Hoko CrossFit out here in Ellicott City, Maryland. Glad to have you guys on this morning, and let's kind of dive right into the topic as we go through. So the title is You Can't Cheat Feel, and the reason being is I learned that from a Westside Barbell course back, I think 2 or 3 years ago now. So Westside Barbell is prolific for having some of the best lifters in the world in terms of strongman and power lifters. And that phrase, you can't cheat feel, really stuck with me from not just a strength conditioning standpoint, but from a physical therapy standpoint as well. And the reason it did is because when we were going through, they had me do a lot of crazy, ridiculous, accessory work, and they were emphasized if you don't feel it where the intended place is supposed to be, then either 1, you're not doing it correctly, or 2, you're not working hard enough, or 3, you need more load. Something along those lines. Either the quality of the rep is not great enough, the quantity is not great enough, or it's not heavy enough. And I've applied that a lot into my general population, working with athletes and working with the fitness athlete, and also working with patients. And I think it's really important that we have this discussion about how should people look at how they feel, and how should we interpret that discussion when we're working with anybody. And I think it's important for a few points. So for the fitness athlete, if you're teaching group classes, if you're looking at movement, we always are looking around load management, right? And load management essentially has to do with physics and how someone's handling a weight that they're lifting. So if someone's doing a deadlift with a weight and their body position looks one way, I can surmise that load is being distributed to a certain tissue more than the others, and I would expect them to feel it there more in general if the load is enough to elicit that type of feel and adaptation within those tissues, right? The most common thing you're going to see is, the curved back deadlift versus the straight back deadlift in terms of technique. More often than not, if someone is curved and the load is significant enough, they'll feel it more in their back than their glutes and their hamstring. Versus if someone has a more quote-unquote neutral spine, which we know still has some flexion, with the deadlift, they'll more likely feel it more in glutes and hamstrings. Now, that's from just a physics load management standpoint, but asking that person in front of you, where do you feel it and what do you feel, are 2 questions that I see butchered all the time in both patient care and working with athletes in exercise classes. We need to have that conversation. We need to ask those questions with these individuals, because that's what we know. Where's the load going? How is it being spread throughout the body? And how is that person interpreting it, right? If you have someone come in for low back pain and they're performing a deadlift with what you believe looks like adequate form, and they report, wow, all I really feel is right kind of above my, tailbone and my lower back, right in the middle. It feels like it's in my spine. That's a way different feeling for that movement of a kettlebell deadlift than, when I do that, I feel a little bit of a hamstring stretch and I really feel my butt working when I come up, right? 2 complete different interpretations. That person can be moving the exact same. So we need to look at what is the load of it, how many have they done, and what is the quality of the movement. All 3 things we can manipulate and change in that individual to try to elicit the feel that what we want. Because ideally for that person, I don't want somebody doing a lift there they feel it in their low back. I want them to feel it in the intended tissue target, which is the glutes and the hamstrings, to try to alleviate the load being spread into that low back. Right? I hope that's kind of making sense as we kind of start working through this, and you get to look at it in sort of a physicsy kind of way, which is great, and in terms of understanding how they feel. Now, where does this get butchered more often than not? And I think it comes to a lot of individuals I see who get these exercise prescriptions. I get handed sheets of paper from people of, here's what I previously did in my physio. And I'm like, okay, show me. And I ask them, where do you feel that? And in no way is the exercise they were given where that person is feeling it in terms of the intention of the exercise. Maybe they're trying to do a squat to increase glute and quad strength or whatever be you, and they're like, no, I kind of just feel that right in the middle of my kneecap every time. It's a lot of pressure. Or no, I feel that in my back or in my ankles. We have to ask these things. How that person feels is the most important thing when it comes to movement. And how we change how they feel is based on the quantity of load, the quality of the movement when they're moving that load, and then how we can change that, manipulate. So that's one aspect. The other way that I think this gets butchered is when it comes to individuals who are working with who might have more long-standing pain or have a really difficult time dissociating different things and how they feel. So here's a really great way to help people organize how they feel within their body when they're moving, is to give them really easy movements that we know they should feel pretty particular, right? So if I want someone to understand what it feels like to have a muscle burn when it's worked significantly, almost to fatigue, I'll often have them do a single leg calf raise until fatigue. I'm like, where do you feel that? And more often than not, they'll say the calf, because it's something they've used to feeling, like their calves are on fire and burning when they're doing that. And I'll be like, great. When you feel that, is that a similar feeling to what you're doing when I have you do this exercise in that particular area, right? Is that what you feel when you're doing a knee extension exercise or a squat? Like, is that the same type of feel? If they report yes, then I know that that load is adequately going to that tissue and they're feeling it appropriately there and not elsewhere where they're having pain. Now, I also apply this to if they're having other types of feels when they're moving, in terms of nervy, numbness, tingling. I'll do an upper limb nerve tension test or a slouch test that I know more likely than not will elicit kind of that nervy numbness tingling sensation. And I'll be like, okay, what does that feel like? Describe it to me. And more often than not, they'll report that type of symptoms. I'm like, perfect, okay, that's more of a nervy sensation, right? If you feel that during an exercise that we're doing, I really don't want to steer you toward that direction. I want to hold back for a little bit and maybe come back on certain things or change the quality. They have to understand that, and you have to help them organize that, right? In addition, I think people should understand and feel what it's like to have kind of this joint feeling and kind of pressure and achiness versus just a muscle working. I think that's important too. Now, when it comes to those types of feelings, okay, muscle, nerve, joint, pressure types of things, in order for you to adequately work somebody through that type of organizational, how they feel when they move, you yourself as a clinician have to understand how that feels. That is vitally important. You need to walk the walk and know what those different types of feelings are and purposely do that, right? That's why Mitch and I are so adamant about walking the walk when it comes to strength training. If you've never been under a barbell when you're deadlifting, right, and it's never gotten heavy enough for you to feel like your back's gonna round and you're trying to resist it, and you wake up the next morning, you're like, holy smokes, my lats and my QLs, my glutes and my hamstrings are all just completely wiped out. If you've never felt that before, you're gonna never understand what it feels like when somebody's trying to slowly build up and load and they report feeling it there versus elsewhere. How do you know? You don't. You have to match how you're moving and how you feel with movement and attempt to have some empathy and understanding for how the person in front of you is moving as well. Combine that with your knowledge and just physics and scientific reasoning of where that load is being spread throughout the tissues, and you're gonna have a pretty good idea what you're doing in rehab for that person. When it comes to you can't cheat feel, wherever that person is feeling it is generally where those tissues are being loaded, except in terms of times that they have maybe long-standing pain that makes things fuzzy, and you need to work around that and have that conversation in a different light. Oftentimes, those people might just have soreness that's interpreted as pain, and it is pain for them, but it's the body doesn't understand the difference between the two, and you need to slowly and gradually expose them to those loads in incremental ways, right? That's what we're shooting for that. I think that's absolutely huge. So I want to leave you with a couple examples just to show you what I'm referring to when this happens, right? Both going to be used with the kettlebell, and I want to give you an idea of how I would approach this for somebody. So I got my handy-dandy Rogue kettlebell. It's always within an arm's reach. So this is one I use a lot for individuals, is a farmer's carry, right? Now, I typically use this for people with low back pain because I want them to understand what their QL feels like and what it's like to get some kind of lateral loading. Now, if the load isn't heavy enough, someone will be like, I just don't really feel that. Maybe it's my grip. And you're like, okay, maybe I need to give you a heavier kettlebell. And so what I'll often do is be like, okay, when I do this, this weight pulls me down and my body pulls me up this way. If I'm heavy enough and I have my shoulder back and I'm keeping that weight away from my side and I'm walking in a slow manner, I'll typically feel that muscle on the side of my back working to try to hold me upright. And I'll describe that to them and talk to them and be like, okay, now where do you feel it? Or I'll just ask them first and then describe it afterwards so I don't kind of bias their opinion. If they're like, I just kind of feel like my shoulder's kind of falling off and it's separated, okay, well maybe that's a quality of movement issue and they need to learn how to sort of set that shoulder back, get a little bit of lat engagement, and pull that weight away. If they're like, I feel this in the middle of my back, right? Well, maybe it's just too much of a load, and they need to differentiate between when that QL is working and they're in a solid stance versus when they're not. All things that they could say, and never be surprised by how somebody feels. It might look exactly the way you want, and they could feel it completely differently, right? You need to understand that point. The last one is always going to be the deadlift. So I touched on it, right? If I'm coming back and shifting my hip back and I have a relatively quote-unquote neutral spine, again, I know, don't hate me for that. I know it flexes a little bit, right? When we come through here, I feel that in my hamstrings and my glutes. Now, someone might look that exact same way, and they might be slightly shifted certain ways like this, which still looks pretty good, but I'm slightly flexed. They'd be like, yeah, when I do that, I feel it like right in the middle of my low lumbar spine, like right here. I'd be like, okay, maybe if you try to untuck your tailbone a little bit, sit back into your hips slightly differently, now where do you feel that? And more often I'd be like, oh yeah, that is kind of like that hamstring stretch, and I feel my butt like trying to hang on. Or sometimes they just need to get more lat engagement to try to elicit that they're spreading the load more evenly throughout all the tissues we want them to do it for, right? So we need to do that. Mark brings up the comment, fear is also a big component in feel, needed to consider. Absolutely, Mark, 100% agree. The fear of movement is huge. When I'm onboarding people into our CrossFit classes, I ask them essentially similar question that of, one, where do you feel it? And two, how do you feel in terms of your confidence and comfortability with that movement, right? I always describe that to them in terms of the strength spectrum. The first half of strength is always confident in themselves and in how they're moving. So you need to consider those as well. I think it's a great point by Mark of if they're afraid to lift something with a deadlift, they're going to feel it inherently differently. And we know that from, people who have more fear when they're coming back from ACL surgery, they'll feel cuts differently. They'll feel leg extension stuff differently. I think the same can apply in a general loading principle. So that's what I'm looking at, and that's what I think the term you can't cheat feel comes from. You need to help individuals organize how they feel when they move. And when they get a better grasp and understanding of that and their capacity, they realize that how they move gives them control over how they feel. Very few people think that, and very few people understand and have kind of that physical literacy over their life to understand the ways things should and should not feel in general when it comes to load management. We can be those guides to help them organize how they're feeling and help them give control back into not only their pain, but into their fitness as well. And that's a completely underrated point. I'll spend more time with TheraBand exercises and table exercises just to organize their awareness of how they feel, right? And not talk about it in terms of, okay, you need to do clamshells to get strong. No, we need a deadlift to get strong. But maybe those clamshells help them understand what that particular muscle feels like when we transfer over to more functional activities and lifts. And that's where I see that spectrum of strength training being for all patients and all athletes along the spectrum of where we go. So I hope this helped kind of organize your brain and how you go about approaching how you can't cheat feel with your fitness athletes and with your patients, and how that we need to have a better conversation with that individual in front of us in terms of how it feels. If you're struggling in terms of how do I know what people should be feeling or kind of where that load is being spread when they do move, I encourage you to, one, get moving yourself more and lifting heavy things more often yourself. Two, checking out our clinical management, the fitness athlete courses that we have both live and online with Mitch, Zach, and I. Or going out and just asking more questions when people are moving of where do they feel it, how do you feel, and compare it to yourself. I think that's huge. I just want to give you a quick update about what's coming on in ICE. We have virtual ICE registration is open. It's currently $29 a month for bi-weekly live lectures and access to all ICE faculty for questions, case studies, discussions, etc. This is open until March 19th. And it is closed again until June 26th. So this is kind of that next window that you have to get for virtual ICE. So one of my favorite ways to get a lot of education up front and almost like a residency format in the way the information is provided. The ICE Sampler is coming up in Las Vegas, April 7th, 8th, and 8th, which is all the ICE faculty for the most part out there preaching 18 hours of content in 2 days that you can't miss. If you believe that the next generation of physical therapists is is what ICE is preaching. I encourage you to go to this and fundamentally reshape the way you think about how PT can be delivered in health and healthcare. So that's that. Mitch is teaching down in Columbia, South Carolina with Zach Long today at Vertex PT. I believe it's at Columbia CrossFit. I'm jacked for those two guys to preach the good word with clinical management and the fitness athlete. Hope you guys have a good rest of the day and a great weekend. Remember, you can't cheat feel. Go lift heavy things. Go ask yourself how you feel and how your patients feel. And I hope you have a good one. Thanks.